And stations coming up on 90 seconds until the launch of hour number 1 of The Line of Fire with Dr. Michael Brown, Salem Radio Network's channel SR2. 90 seconds from Mark. 90 seconds. And stations, it's now 1 minute before the start of hour number 1 of The Line of Fire with Dr. Michael Brown. 1 minute from Mark. 1 minute. And stations now the final time check before the start of hour number 1 of The Line of Fire with Dr. Michael Brown. 30 seconds until hour number 1 from Mark. That was our final verbal time check for The Line of Fire with Dr. Michael Brown. We'll have a long tone at 10 seconds before, followed by a short one at 5 seconds. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Well, today I'm going to speak with a black pastor, a white pastor. They work in the same state, serve the same God. We'll talk about the things that unite us and that try to divide us.
It's time for The Line of Fire with your host, activist, author, international speaker, and theologian, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Michael Brown is the director of the Coalition of Conscience and president of Fire School of Ministry. Get into The Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. That's 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
You know, one of the things that I talk about constantly is let's have a conversation. Let's sit and listen to one another. For me, it starts with listening. For me, it starts with hearing what others have to say, processing, and then sharing my perspective. And right now, in the midst of massive division in America, certainly as bad as, if not worse than any division I've ever seen in my lifetime, and I'm 65 now and lived through the tumultuous 60s, we must have these conversations. We must speak to people from different perspectives, backgrounds, ethnicities, skin color, and talk about issues that unite us and issues that could potentially divide us. So I'm joined today on the air by Pastor Shane Idleman. Shane and I become good friends in the last few years. Shane has a great heart for revival. He is the pastor of Westside Christian Fellowship. I had the joy of preaching there, actually, the very beginning of this year, I think it was, that we were there. Got to meet Shane and his family. And Shane suggested, why don't we have a conversation on the air where, as Shane is a white American, why don't we get a black pastor on as well and have a conversation where we ask some tough questions. We see areas where we can have misunderstanding. We probe for different ways where we can work together. So we're going to be joined in a moment also by Pastor Billy Nettles. I don't know Pastor Nettles, but he's got an amazing bio. Born in the South, raised throughout the United States, as a part of an Army family, then enlisted in the Army himself as a believer. Was based in Germany for a period of time and with his family. And then he returned to U.S., settled in California, began a career in law enforcement. Fascinating. Where he rose to the rank of field director with the Los Angeles County Probation Department. Bivocational pastor, he served in various ministry capacities for approximately 36 years, and he's currently serving as associate teaching pastor and missionary to Haiti. So we are getting Pastor Nettles on the other line, just having a slight problem connecting. In the meantime, Pastor Shane, welcome back to the Line of Fire. How you doing, man?
Welcome. It's good to be here in warm Southern California.
Yeah, so how has COVID-19 impacted you and your church? Well, we're waiting to connect with Pastor Billy. Let's talk about that.
Well, it was definitely interesting. I mean, we, like everyone else, shut down for the first 15 days and then obviously shut down again when the president encouraged churches to do that. We didn't want to be part of the problem. You want to be part of the solution. But then as time went on and our governor here in California made certain statements and we looked at the stats and we talked to medical experts and, we decided to reopen with a lot of churches in California, Jack Hibbs and a lot of others on Pentecost Sunday. And but we've still been following the social guidelines, distancing guidelines, all the criteria that they ask. We thought if Home Depot can open and Lowe's and Costco, the churches should be able to open too. So we've been open about 4 weeks now, and the services have just been powerful. People are hungry for God, but you're finding, I'm sure you'll see this across the board, is a lot of people aren't returning. Most people are not returning to church as far as 40, 50, 60%. And we're seeing about 30%, 40% not returning, but also picking up a lot of new people coming that are really just hungry for more of God. So that's where we're at right now. And I think Billy's on now, if I'm not mistaken.
Almost. We're still.
Almost, okay.
No, in fact, I'm watching our line here. We've probably tried to connect about 10 times so far. So I'm not sure what's happening, but we will connect soon enough.
Okay.
And Shane, what are you seeing in terms of online hunger, interest, people watching broadcasts, numbers compared to before the pandemic? Is that an indication of spiritual hunger, what you're seeing?
Well, it's ironic you said that because the first, I'll never forget March 14th. I left Burbank Airport, flew into Dallas, got a text on the tarmac that my speaking engagement has been canceled. So waited in the airport for 9 hours and flew back home to Burbank. That was an interesting day. So I'll never forget that. But ever since that point, our online numbers went up dramatically. I think we had close to 1 million views, sermon views on Facebook. You can track it there on your views. Now, how many playthroughs? We're about 250,000. So obviously you don't get as many playthroughs. But, that was showing the hunger through the end of March, April, and then around the end of May, things started actually, the numbers, the online viewing dropped about 50, 60, 70%. So I don't know if people are just getting comfortable again or they're back to their churches, but definitely the online presence has grown incredibly strong. But as you know, it's always good to be there in person.
Oh, yeah.
Not sitting in your pajamas, sipping your latte. So, but God uses that too. We've never heard from so many people in the last 2 months than we have, I think, in the last decade of our ministry, from people all over just being touched. So that's positive.
Yeah, and what about being in California and just the state there being one of the more liberal states in the nation? The governor, when he was mayor of San Francisco, decided to issue marriage certificates for same-sex couples. I mean, this was years ago. So Gavin Newsom has been quite a pioneer in that regard in ways that we would really differ with. What's it like being a pastor in California? Do you feel you've got great churches, some of the finest mega churches in the country, and fine networks of churches, but do you feel even more like a rejected minority in the state?
Well, right now we're in interesting times because they are watching the churches pretty carefully as far as COVID and what we're saying and different things. And I'm actually in Los Angeles County, so not only in California, but in Los Angeles County, about 60 miles north of Hollywood. So right now, I think COVID and the protesting, all that has really kind of distracted a lot of people, looking at the church as far as nitpicking. But for us, it hasn't been that difficult yet. I mean, there's legislation coming down the pipe. There's people that are hostile to the gospel. But overall, I think we have to remember that God is working in California. And I run into people all the time. They're like, how can you pastor in California? How can you? Well, if God's called you to a place, you make a big difference in that place. So I think personally that we're seeing God's safety, his shelter, protection, his covering. But yeah, we get the negative emails. We get the editorials in our local paper. We get, those people that are obviously upset at what we're doing. But overall, I think God's grace has been incredibly profound that I've seen.
Great. And at long last, Pastor Billy Nettles, the delay in getting you on at least allowed me to read your amazing biography, sir. So thanks for joining us on the air today. Great to be with you.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. So
great to be with you. Thank you.
Yes. So what I really want to do with you two brothers on the line is to have the kind of conversations that we need to do as the church in America in the midst of great division and racial discord and unrest and pain. So, Pastor Nettles, do you feel that by and large, and this is a very general question, sir, but that by and large, Black Americans see America differently than white Americans do? I mean, a very obvious, basic question, but your honest perspective.
Again, thank you for having me, Dr. Brown. And yes, to answer that question, Black people have a different lens, and their lens is a historical lens. It is a lens that has been jaded by a perspective that has so many variables that have contributed to the sense of being marginalized, being seen as not even as almost second-class citizens.
Mm-hmm.
Like, like we're being, like anything that anything that you get that is normal in terms of being assimilated into the mainstream, it's almost like, if a favor is being done to you. It's something that we're supposed to have as Americans, but
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like it's a favor to you, and it's a favor to you, if that makes sense.
Yes, it certainly does. Let me ask a second question, which is, does the Black Lives Matter movement speak for you and your Christian friends?
The Black Lives Matter movement, and I think that this is the problem that with especially with regards to the qualification that you just made to me and my Christian friends. The Black Lives Movement is not just a organization.
Mm-hmm.
It's a statement. So, and what the problem is that people conflate the statement and the organization.
Exactly.
There are tenets that are being espoused by the Black Lives Movement that I may not agree with, but I certainly agree with the statement.
Mm-hmm.
And I not only do I agree with it, but full-throated agree with it. But I don't necessarily agree with all the tenets. I don't think there is any movement or organization now that is monolithic in that sense anymore. Not just Black Lives Matter, but you can choose whatever movement, and people may agree with what they want and not agree how to get there, or agree with the methods that are being chosen to get there. But I certainly full-throated agree with with that mantra, Black Lives Matter.
Got it. And we're again just getting started. I'm speaking with Pastor Billy Nettles and Pastor Shane Idleman, and we're gonna make sure we ask questions so we are not like ships passing each other in the night. Pastor Shane, Pastor Billy, friends, we're united in Jesus. So I want to probe so that we can put issues on the table for the purpose of better understanding, so we, the church, can bring a message of life, healing, reconciliation, justice to the society instead of just reacting to the world around us. Hey, friends, just a reminder, if you're watching on YouTube live stream or Facebook live stream, there's a donate button. As you click on that, your support of any size makes a great, great difference. We know by God's grace, we reach a lot of people every week, but very few stand with us. So if you could be among those, that would be amazing. So right on your Facebook page or on YouTube, if you're watching on live stream, just click to stand with us today. Thanks. It's actually a very complex question. When we speak of Jewish people, do we mean, is this something defined religiously? Is it something defined ethnically? How do we define what is a Jew? Who is a Jew? You know, it's a conversation that continues into this day. When Jesus said in John chapter 4, verse 22, salvation is from the Jews, right? He said to the Samaritan woman, you don't know what you're worshiping, but we know because salvation is from the Jews. There was obviously a defined group of people, the Jews, and in the ancient world, people were known as the Jews, and in the world today, still known as the Jews. So is it ethnic? Is it religious? Well, it's a combination of both, all right? On the one hand, if you are a physical descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, then you would be considered a Jew, right? You are part of that people ethnically. So in the same way, someone that lives in America is an American, someone who lives in Italy is an Italian. You've been there for generations, that's your heritage. And then maybe you go to another country for a little while, so you're an American in Italy or an Italian in Germany, right? So the same thing with a Jew. You can be secular, you can be religious, but you're still a Jew ethnically. The other way that you can be a Jew is religiously. If you practice Judaism, if you do what Ruth did and turn away from the gods of the Moabites to worship the God of Israel and be joined with the people. So someone can convert to Judaism and they are now considered Jewish, and their children would then be considered Jewish. All right, so you have people who are ethnically Jewish and are not religious, and then you have people who are ethnically non-Jewish who convert to Judaism and now become part of the Jewish people. So it is both ethnic and religious. That being said, if you completely depart religiously, over a period of time, you'll lose your ethnic identity as well.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown. Get into the line of fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
I'm speaking with two California pastors, Pastor Shane Idleman, Pastor Billy Nettles, one a white pastor, one a black pastor. I bring that up because we really want to talk through issues that divide us, issues that unite us, and have constructive interaction as brothers together in the Lord. I want to get back to Pastor Shane in a moment, but Pastor Billy, a lot of white Americans don't understand why you need to shout out Black Lives Matter, and if we say all lives matter, that is a slight or a slap in the face. So what I realize a lot of my white friends miss is the idea that for many Black Americans, there's the perception that a Black life does not matter, that a Black life can be taken illegally and the legal system will then go ahead and defend it, so that no one's arguing the all lives matter question. So why can that be a frustration? Someone's well-meaning, it's like, hey, all lives matter, but that can be perceived as kind of a slap in the face to the Black community. Could you articulate that a little more for us?
Yeah, let me say this. When someone says Black Lives Matter, first of all, it is not to say that all lives don't matter. Now, this is a biblical model. Jesus gave us a parable where the shepherd left the 99 for one.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't leave the 99 because they didn't matter. He left the 99 because the one needed him. The one was in trouble. The one needed to be rescued. So that is a biblical model of the mantra Black Lives Matter.
Mm-hmm.
For someone to respond to Black Lives Matter with all lives matter is tantamount to say a mother is eulogizing her child. She's saying, "Oh, she's at the funeral and she's saying, "Oh, this child was so wonderful to me. I mean, he would make me breakfast, even though he burned the toast in the morning, but he would make me breakfast, and he was just a wonderful child, and I really loved my child." And all of a sudden, someone comes up out of the crowd and takes the microphone and says, "Well, our children are nice too." That's absurd. You see, it does not. What white America, who has a problem with someone saying that Black Lives Matter, they have to ask themselves, why does that bother me so much? Why does it bother you that an individual will say Black Lives Matter? What is it that vexes you? Why is that provocative? I would trade, Dr. Brown. You want to trade with me, and you take the saying Black Lives Matter, and I take the privilege that I don't have to say Black Lives Matter? I'll trade with you. I don't want to be out marching in the sun and the street declaring something that ought to be obvious, that I matter. I'll trade with you. You take the mark. You take the mantra, and I'll take the privilege.
Mm. Yeah, and Pastor Billy, I think the thing that is helpful for many white Americans to understand, especially evangelicals, that you want to love the Lord and love your neighbor. And I want to go to Pastor Shane in a moment. That the thing that is important is to understand why it needs to be said. In other words, that's the blind spot for many white Americans. Like, of course, Black Lives Matter. Who would think otherwise? That's the whole thing. What many people do think otherwise, and there's a history that says otherwise, and that's why it gets shouted out. So, of course, I want to come back to you, Pastor Billy, and thank you for your directness. That's exactly why I asked you to be on the air. So thank you for your directness and your candor. So Pastor Shane, many times white evangelicals will look at what's happening. They'll see the extreme elements of the riots, some of the extreme platform statement of Black Lives Matter. They will see other forces involved, now defacing a statue of George Washington, whatever. And there's a feeling as if something's being co-opted, and I want to stand with you, but others are pushing me away. What are you trying to work through now as a pastor? Heart for unity, heart for reconciliation, heart for working together. If you can't buy into a certain thing, when can you stand with your brothers? What are you trying to work through right now as a godly pastor in the midst of this?
Well, I think I can answer that and maybe answer a few things that Billy said too. But it's good that the listeners know that actually Billy's a friend of mine. He helps pastor church 20 minutes from me, and we've known each other many years. So, but this is definitely bringing out a lot of raw emotions on both sides because of obviously what's going on. But I do want to just comment on a few things and then get to your question, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
And again, I think we do need to listen more than we speak. I think as white people, we need to give Pastor Billy 40 minutes and me 20. We got to listen more than we speak in this area. But I don't have a problem, saying Black Lives Matter whatsoever. But I guess from not only my perspective, but if you look at Vody Bachman, Candace Owens, Marcus Rogers, even our own associate pastor here, Pastor Abram Thomas, all black men and women, solid men and women of God. And I think I'm speaking for most of them, here's our issue, Black Lives Matter, but it's hard to believe that when nobody acknowledges the black police officers that were shot. Nobody acknowledges the 13 blacks recently killed in Chicago, one being a 3-year-old. So to me, it looks like, you look at the militant, and if you just research the history, the militant aspect of Marxism through the Black Lives Matter movement, the push for homosexuality and lesbianism, the deconstruction of the family unit, and there's no forgiveness or redemption. It's a black empowerment movement. So we do have to look through a different lens, and it has to be the lens, a biblical lens. So my concern is that many are not looking through a biblical lens. They're looking through a secular lens and kind of being drawn away by this because our only hope is repentance and forgiveness. It's not in protesting, although I'm supportive of that. It's not in all the things that are going on. Our only hope is in forgiveness and repentance and talking to each other and understanding where everyone is coming from. And for me, it looks like they're targeting an entire ethnic group with a crime that we did not commit. And to say 99%, what about the 1%? They needed Jesus, right? But what about the innocent children being aborted, the black children? And that's why Planned Parenthood was created, if you look at the history and what they need. So my thought is, yes, Black Lives Matter. And I see what Billy's saying is when you say, but all lives matter, then you actually remove the element of, hey, no, we have to point out the black racism against blacks in our community. And it seems to, when you say all lives matter, it seems to kind of throw that under the bus. And like it's almost like an excuse to move on from that. So I think they do matter. I think protests are great. I think black pastors and people across the United States need to come together and be united. But I see plenty of protests, but no prayer meetings. And so that's, I think, my concern is we cannot support a movement like Black Lives Matter because of all the what they stand for, everything I just listed. So I'd love to come together with biblical understanding and move forward. But that's the issue at hand right now. So what are we doing? I don't know if Billy's supposed to be at it, and I'm not going to make it. But at 1 o'clock today, we had pastors coming together, black and white, and talk about racial reconciliation. So we're all on the same page. We're all in this together. I've been praying. We've been having prayer meetings at our church every day, 2 hours a day on this issue. So we are doing a lot behind the scenes. We just can't gravitate towards a movement that really seems to be anti-God in every single area. And you look at the fruit that's being produced. Look at the fruit that's being produced. Our police officers are being demeaned and disrespected. People are being beat up in grocery stores, in Macy's. I don't think this is a good direction. I don't think this is a healthy direction. Granted, something needs to change. And I think another question out there, I won't keep long. I want to give Billy more time, but we see, okay, yeah, whatever happened in Minneapolis was a travesty. I couldn't even watch the whole video. But the officer was charged, probably going to spend the rest of his life in jail, and so were those there. So we see, okay, justice is served. We need to change the arrogance or the racism in some of the policemen. Well, that is changed through the gospel, not through protest. Not what we're doing now is not going to change the heart of our nation whatsoever. You cannot force laws upon people, but you can change the heart. So that's my passion, is to get the gospel to officers. And we have many officers that go to our church and LAPD, LA County Sheriff. I personally don't know any racists. Of course, there are. But what they say, Shane, we're dealing with white people and Hispanic, Asian, black. No, the color doesn't matter. It's constantly 8, 12 hours a day of dealing with just tons of animosity and strife. It really can wear on a person. So I don't know what the solution is other than looking to Christ and being united in the hope of the gospel. But that's my 2 cents on why we cannot support Black Lives Matter. Even black people.
All right, so I'm going to jump in, Pastor Billy. We have a break, but I'm just going to let you talk as long as you need to talk to share your perspective when we come back. So you're going to have a nice extended segment. I'm sure there are a bunch of things you want to address. I just say this one. I just will say this one thing, and then we have a break, and I come back turning things straight over to Pastor Nettles. Some black friends said to me, make sure that our support of the statement Black Lives Matter is louder than our criticism of the Black Lives Matter movement. And that sounds like wisdom to me. The challenge is when the movement or what's happening in society, and much of it is from all different quarters, is so disruptive and negative, can we make sure that we are saying what needs to be said, the positive, the righteous, the biblical, saying that more loudly? Can our standing together with our black brothers and sisters in Black America right now at a time of pain, can that be louder than our opposition to these radical elements in the movement? We come back, we're going to hear from Pastor Nettles, an extended sharing of his heart.
Here's a
Did God harden Pharaoh's heart? Well, yes, of course. The biblical text is quite explicit that God did that, but is that the whole story? Did Pharaoh also harden his heart? Did God confirm Pharaoh in his hardness before further hardening and stiffening his heart? What does the Hebrew say? What's the chronology? Well, let's take a look in Exodus chapter 4, verse 21. God speaking to Moses, and there we read, the Lord said to Moses, when you go back to Egypt, see that you do before Pharaoh all the miracles that I've put in your power, but I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. You say, well, there it tells us flat out, God will harden his heart so he won't let the people go. Okay, if we go back to the 3rd chapter, I'm looking at verse 19, look it up. You see that God tells Moses, this is the 3rd chapter, so before what we just read, God tells him, I'm sure that the king of Egypt, I'm sure that Pharaoh will not let you go. Then start reading through the account, and you'll see 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, over and over, and Pharaoh hardens his heart, Pharaoh hardens his heart, Pharaoh hardens his heart, Pharaoh hardens his heart. In other words, his will, his sin, his evil, his stubbornness. This is the very reason that God raised up a wicked man to be in that position at that time. All right, he didn't raise up a God-fearing man and then harden his heart and turn him away. He didn't raise up a humble man looking to the Lord for help and then harden his heart and turn him away. Rather, he raised up a wicked man with a wicked heart, and Pharaoh over and again says, no, 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 no. His pride, his rebellion, no, no, no. Then the first thing it says is that God strengthens his heart. That's the first Hebrew word that's used for harden. Okay, it is literally to strengthen. So God now, as Pharaoh's reaping what he sows and God's bringing judgment on him, he's strengthening him in his own sinful resolve. And then the next one is making his heart heavy in that sense. And then the last one, he's making it harsh or hard. In other words, there is a progression. As Pharaoh sins, as Pharaoh hardens his heart, as Pharaoh says no to God, God says, all right, I'm going to confirm you in your sin. You are sinning, you're rebelling. I'm going to confirm you in your sin and rebellion. I'm going to make your heart even harder. I'm going to make it now so this is your resolve to sin. I am backing your resolve to sin. And so, again, it's not God taking someone and saying, God, help me. God, I need help. I have mercy. I want to do the right thing, but I need help. And God says, I'm going to harden you. Rather, God is, yes, he does harden. He does stiffen. He does do this to Pharaoh's heart. But number one, Pharaoh does it first. God says first that Pharaoh will do it. And number two, it is progressive, a strengthening of Hebrew in terms of what happens. This is the result of sin, and God did what was right.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
If you're tuning in just now, Michael Brown here, speaking with 2 Christian leaders in California, both in pastoral ministry, one also in law enforcement with that background as well. And one is a black pastor, one is a white pastor. And the reason for this discussion at such a time as this is quite obvious. So Pastor Billy Nettles and Pastor Shane Idleman. Pastor Billy, I just want to set things up, and then you speak until you're done sharing your heart, all right? But there are frustrations many times that the black Christian community has with the white Christian community, saying you're not hearing us, you're not understanding, you're discounting history. But Pastor Shane raised a question that often comes up. We hear Black Lives Matter, but then we hear of so many shootings in inner city, or a little child killed, or things like that, or a black cop killed. We think, don't all Black lives matter? So again, these are questions that come up. I want you to address these. I know you're going to speak freely from your heart, but address the questions, address some of the things that Pastor Shane is saying, so that I want to make sure that we hear a perspective. And that's what we do often on talk radio. Hear, listen. I've been doing that for years, and it's helped me immensely. So please share your heart freely with us, sir.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Brown. First of all, I'd like to say that, yeah, I have 30 years of experience in law enforcement. Actually, I've been bivocational. I have not retired yet. I'm looking to retire tomorrow. I don't know. But let me say that this is not about black people against law enforcement. It's not about black people against anybody. It's about black people for black people. Shane said something that I want to take issue with. He said something to the effect that black empowerment was not working, or that it wasn't viable, or that it wasn't fruitful, or that it wasn't righteous, or whatever. But black empowerment is not Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is not all-encompassing of what black empowerment is. And it does not represent all of the totality of the voices of the black community. One of the things that shakes really, really bad with black folks, and it has historically, is that, you know, Shane mentioned some names. He talked about Dr. Bodie and and Candace Owens and these folks and how great these people are. These people certainly don't speak for the black community. I love Dr. Bodie, by the way. I love him. I appreciate his biblical depth and his moorings. But I take tremendous issue with the fact that some of these folks who have, even if some of the things that they are saying are true, are not said with the right spirit. The Bible says what we say should be seasoned with grace, and certainly it chafes with the black community. If Candace Owens certainly is not doesn't have no biblical mooring. She has some conservative mooring, and how often in America are we conflating conservatism with some biblical credibility? That doesn't, just because you're conservative, that doesn't give you biblical credibility. I'm neither a Republican or a Democrat. I vote my Christian conscience, but I certainly know that it is important that for us in the black community that we don't want the status quo giving us our leaders or telling us who is credible leaders. And when you start mentioning these people and riddling off people that support your perspective, then of course it's going to chafe with the black community. Now, as far as the rioting and all of those things, I stand wholeheartedly with the protest. I condemn violence. Not only don't I condone it, I condemn it. I condemn violence. I condemn vandalism. I condemn theft. I condemn those things. I don't agree with it. I understand the frustration that drives that. Now, some of those people that are doing that crazy stuff and doing those unrighteous things, that's because, and Sean said, I agree with him, this is an issue that is way past cognitive stuff. This is visceral. This is gut. This is heart stuff that people's hearts need to be changed. But let me tell you something. When people are out there protesting, it does accomplish something. Now, while that man who I'm awaiting for his heart to change, his knee is on my neck. I'm waiting for his heart to change. Now, that's going to take some time. Legislation won't make his heart change, but it'll make him get his knee off my neck. So the protests are fruitful. Now, we're not asking you to support the Black Lives Movement. Again, people are conflating the movement and the mantra.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not on board with all of the tenets of Black Lives Movement, but I certainly support the mantra. And I want to share something with you that I think is my heart. I'm more concerned, as most black folk are, about the threat posed to my health and general well-being by racism and injustice in America than I ever was or will be about COVID-19. As I am a sportsman, I'm a weapons enthusiast, and two of my very dear friends, who I would characterize as pacifists when it comes to weapons, asked me for advice on the purchase of one. If you looked up the word peace, their picture would be there with them throwing up a peace sign. And their inquiry gave me impetus for thought. I mean, it kind of boggles my mind. I figured that if what these men have and are experiencing here recently caused them to not just reconsider their need for protection, but also to reframe their whole ideology about protecting themselves, that they've experienced some really deep trauma. Now, these men are educated and they hold influential positions in their place of employment. And I only bring that up to say this. Now, they have a great deal of experience navigating their environment. And in these environments, they are the minority. But now even these men who have the experience of dealing with being the only black person or the first black person, even these men are now on the balls of their feet and at high alert. What is the mental, if these men with all of these tools are pushed into that mindset, what is the mental and emotional condition of black people who have not been fortunate enough to have their life experiences? Then I begin to think of myself. Made me think of me. I'm a pastor in a rather large multi-ethnic church, and being bivocational in law enforcement, I also serve as a manager in law enforcement and in the largest probation department in the world. I hold advanced degrees that has brought me into spaces that were not necessarily meant to accommodate my melanin infused self. I've been the first black this and the only black that far too many times. And I'm experienced at, I would say I'm experienced at the art of brokering culture. But even I am tired. I'm tired because I not only have to deal with the tasks that are presented in the space, in my space, in the space that I live in, but I also have to deal with the specter of race that demands that I prove I deserve to be there. Dr. Brown, I recently facilitated the communion at our church's Sunday gathering, and it was emotional. It became a watershed moment for me. I felt the weight and wear on my soul, and I wept. I didn't want to. I felt like I gave up some power when I wept, but my soul was tired. I didn't weep because I feel inferior. Anyone who knows me knows that I love me for me. I love the skin that I'm in, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I don't have esteem issues. Some might even argue that I think too highly of myself. By the way, the jury's still out on that. I didn't weep because I want to be assimilated into America's We Like You club. I'm not trying to be accepted like Bodie or Candace Owens or any of those guys that Shane mentioned. I didn't weep because I want to be accepted and assimilated into America's club. I have a loving wife and a family who support and know my worth. I attend a church and live in a community that, though far from perfect, genuinely affirms my value and considers my leadership as credible. No, I'm going to tell you why I wept, Dr. Brown. I wept simply because my soul is tired. And if someone like me with all of these positive elements to bolster them up and give them hope, if I'm traumatized to tears, what about those who are struggling? What about that marginalized brother who is unemployed with a family to feed, or that sister who deals with the double weight of disenfranchisement because she's black and a woman? What must they be feeling right now? Please hear me when I say that if the people marching and protesting, and they are not just black folk, they are of all races, if they are willing to take their chances with COVID-19, it is sending a strong message of their priorities. You see, the message I hear clearly is they want relief from what they consider and what I see as oppressive weight of racism and systemic inequity. And they believe that the virus of racism in our country is a greater threat to their health than is COVID-19.
Hey, I've got to jump in, sir. I appreciate your eloquence. I think you have given some insight into some critically important areas. You want to love your neighbors yourself. Try to get in your neighbor's skin. If you can't get that far, listen your neighbor. We'll be right back with Pastor Shane on the other side. Can we really make the scripture say whatever we want it to? Can we twist the Bible in any direction? Can we take a verse and get a wrong message from it? Yeah, if you read it wrongly, if you treat it wrongly, you can. So there's an example that's commonly used where Jesus is speaking to Judas. So it's John chapter 13 and verse 27. They're at the Last Supper, and it says, after he had taken the morsel, so Judas takes the morsel, Satan entered into him. Jesus said to him, what you are going to do quickly. Then you read another verse, and it says, Judas hung himself. Then you have Jesus saying elsewhere, go and do likewise. You've seen this done, go and do likewise. You can pull a verse here, 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 and put it together to make a message that's totally contrary to the Bible. You could do the same thing with any book. You could do the same thing with a phone book, and pull out a page here and a line here and a sentence there to make it mean whatever you want. But if you read the Bible rightly, no, you can't make it mean whatever you want it to mean. You can't make it say whatever you want it to say. So what's the key? Read everything in proper context and read everything with respect to the type of literature it is. Understand poetry is poetry. If the Bible says God is our rock, it doesn't mean that he is a physical rock. If you're reading something that Paul wrote, don't just pull out the one line, look at the whole letter. And then if you need more context, look at Paul's other letters. Or if you need more context, look at the rest of the New Testament. Or if you need the fullest context, look at the whole Bible. And then understand, as God speaks and reveals himself, that we get more and more insight into who he is and his nature, not contradicting what comes before, but clarifying as we continue to read the full revelation through the cross. Read it rightly, and you'll understand it rightly always.
International speaker and theologian Dr. Michael Brown. Your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Get into the line of fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Thanks, friends. Michael Brown here. A couple weeks back, Pastor Shane Idleman said, hey, why don't we come on the air? He's a white pastor. Why doesn't he get one of his colleagues, a black pastor, to have a dialogue, discussion of key issues where we need to hear each other? And I've said for years, say, let's just put it on the table. I'm going to be candid with you, be candid with me. And if what I say is offensive, just let's hear each other. Let's be honest. Let's speak candidly. And Pastor Nettles, just to let you know, with talk radio often going back and forth, I don't remember just giving a whole segment over for someone to speak and share their heart. So thanks for being so eloquent and clear. Pastor Shane, you and Pastor Billy are friends. You worked in the same city, and yet our life perspective, upbringing, experience, very different. What were you thinking as Pastor Billy was sharing, and what do you want to say in terms of interacting, response, adding to?
Well, I won't keep us long because I know what Billy has to say actually right now is we need to be listening more than speaking. But I want to just remind all of us that the Holy Spirit's not divided. I think we forget that. So the Holy Spirit and Pastor Billy, the Holy Spirit and me, is not divided. So we need to find out where that division is coming from. Something that I've experienced just firsthand recently is I've actually asked about a half dozen black pastors in the last few weeks. I would send them, let's say, Black Lives Matter. Their leaders came out saying we're militant. And so I say, hey, have you heard this? Is this true? And nobody responds. Nobody wants to talk about it. So to me, it kind of sends the message that they're, in many regards, they're not open to hearing the other side. Now, that could just be my skewed opinion, but nobody on that side wants to be challenged with some of these issues. And I agree with Pastor Billy, Vody, Candace, Marcus. They don't speak for the whole black community, but I will tell you this, they speak for a very large portion of the black community because no one voice speaks. Is it Al Sharpton speaking for the black? Of course not. We have to look at different voices. And what these voices are saying, Vody, Candace, Marcus, whenever I send it to black people, they don't want to hear what they're saying. So my plea is that we all be more open and teachable. I think that's what we're missing, the aspect of humility. And also, all of us are experiencing the need for protection. Billy's absolutely right. I've never felt more stress in ministry in the last 3 months than I have in all of my life. There's a park right by his church that I can no longer go to after 5 p.m. with my son. We're walking around, feeling the same amount of tension. Now, granted, it's not to the same scale because of the history of America. I got it. But to say that white people are not experiencing this massive upheaval and are concerned, we're feeling it as well. So, that's just my 2 cents. I think, what would relief look like? Like Billy says, we need relief. And what would relief look like? And the protesters, I agree, you should be able to go out and protest. It's part of our government. But he says, look at the fruit of the protest. And that's what I say, too. Look at the fruit that is being produced. How can we? But I don't have the answer. I don't think anybody does right now, because there's not a Black Lives Movement that is more biblically centered. And I think that's our only hope. The heart has to change. We're seeing an uprising in crime. We're seeing just a huge, massive amount of abuse, from people being beat up for the skin color in a Macy's just recently, or in a grocery store, or an elderly man being pushed off a bus and actually dying. And you're just seeing this huge, just civil unrest. So personally, I don't think the Black Lives Matter is the answer. However, how can we make that point that Black lives do matter? Our nation is out of control. But I'm also a little frustrated at the history. Why tear down statues when you look at Auschwitz, for example? They kept that up to remind us of our evil, remind us of our sin. And many of the founding fathers, I have 3 pages in my book, One Nation Above God, actually fought for the abolition of slavery. Ulysses S. Grant, they removed his statue, but Lincoln put him in charge of the Northern Army to wipe out this. So I sometimes I think that we're just not looking at history through the correct lens, that this is a fallen nation, that there are many people that don't know God, and that's our only hope. My only hope is the gospel and getting hearts to change, and not going back and forth and trying to say the same talking points. And finally, when Billy mentioned, conservative ideals, like with Candace, but if conservative ideals line up with scriptural truth, I think we need to listen to those ideals. So it's not about political parties, but it is about what does the Bible say about all of these different issues.
All right. So, Shane, I appreciate sharing that perspective as well. And obviously we could go on for many hours, and we need to. And Pastor Billy, for each point that was raised, each time, it's triggering a bunch of things that we want to respond to. Here's what we have to do, because we've got barely 5 minutes. Let's dig down. Sir, you're involved in law enforcement. You mentioned systemic inequity. We all agree that the Bible is a book of justice and compassion. We together condemn violence. Together we shout out, yes, Black lives do matter. Let everyone feel that, know that. If you were going to suggest actual changes that needed to take place within law enforcement, just speak to that for a few minutes. We got literally 4.5 minutes. If you were going to say, okay, here's an idea of things we need to address and change, speak to that.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Let me say this before I do that. Shane said that Candace Owens and Bodie and a few of those other people speak for large contingencies of the black community. That's not true. They don't. However, I appreciate a lot. Like I said, Bodie's one of my favorite preachers and theologians, but that's not true that they speak for a large contingency of. Actually, they're considered pariahs for the most part. As far as law enforcement is concerned, I would love to see, and this is nothing new, Dr. Brown, community policing. That's nothing new. That the people that hold the people in the community accountable come from the community. You see, it's hard for me to have been in law enforcement as long as I have. I think most of the times where I have been effective, it has been when I was able to relate to the story of the people that I got involved with. When I was able to I'm pretty much a disciplinarian, and so some people might even be surprised to hear that coming from me. I believe in holding people accountable. I believe in the rule of law. But how can you believe in the rule of a law that is not equitably dispensed when people of color are being incarcerated at a higher rate, and they are a lower percentage of the population, when the crimes that are more associated with people of color and in that community have higher rates of incarceration,
sentencing, longer sentencing.
Yeah. And it's obvious. I mean, you look at the old standard that has come up time and time again with crack cocaine and powder cocaine. They're both destructive. They're both illegal, and yet they carry different sentencing. But they are associated with different groups of folks. And so it takes me back to when to the Jim Crow laws when vagrancy was illegal, and they used that to imprison black men because they couldn't get jobs. So they imprisoned them, and they ended up going back to the slave holders that had to release them and work for them, and the government got the few cents that they made each day, and they still got free labor. So I mean, like I said at the onset, Dr. Brown, the lens through which black people are seeing how America has handled them is historical, and it is in order to rewrite, and I don't mean REWRITE, I mean RIGHT. How do we right these wrongs? How do we do this ugliness? We've got to admit that we've been wrong, even in evangelical circles. Mm-hmm. Jonathan Edwards, was a great revivalist and ushered in a movement of God. But this guy who preached against, I mean, you got to be real. He preached against things that were wrong, but he owned slaves. One of his first slaves that he bought was a 14-year-old black girl. Look at history, man. I mean, and don't let history be his story. Let it be history. Don't let it be his story. That's how, in Black America, that's how we see history. It's only told, it's his story. It's your story. It's not the story.
Yeah, and my brother, I apologize. I've just got to jump in and say this. What I've encouraged everyone, I said, look, no one ever said America's a perfect nation. No nation's ever been perfect. And when it comes to so-called white fragility, it's like, what to be fragile about? If forefathers blew certain things, you admit it. If there's ongoing stuff, let's deal with it. But see, I've had the benefit of hearing conversations like this for years now through listeners and through some of my faithful friends that are texting me daily, like, you're finally getting what we've been saying for 250 years. This is what we need to do. And if this triggers further conversations, please let it. Please let this little conversation today trigger deeper conversations, and let's listen first. Pastor Billy, Pastor Shane, thank you for joining us, my brothers. Thank you.
Thank you as well.
Thank you for having me,
Billy. All right, talk to you later.
Thank you, Shane.